Scott, do the Bengals need Victor Cruz in your estimation? Would he be an upgrade, or is he kind of more of the same and just a veteran guy at this point?
I think for him, and it really depends on who you're getting. I mean, he obviously had 2 insanely good years in 2011, 2012, when he had, I think it was like 19 touchdowns, 2,600 yards. Was this guy, huge yards per reception. I think he had like 18 or 19 yards per reception that first year. Every year since then, unfortunately, his catch percentage has gone down, and it's not because he's still catching, deep pass. I mean, his yards per reception is dropping, and his catch percentage is dropping. And granted, he was hurt the 1 year, and he got outplayed and kind of got demoted to third, fourth string behind Sterling Shepard. And so he obviously seems to be the odd man out. In New York, he, I think, has something like 2 touchdown receptions the last 3 seasons. He would be a veteran presence. I mean, he'll be 31 this season, so you can't go – I mean, depending on what kind of person he is. It's kind of hard to say if he's what the Bengals need, if he has the speed. If he still has that speed where he's going to, throw out these long 30, 40-yard touchdown catches, then, yeah, sure, bring him in, because he's someone that – I mean, that was one of the complaints last year, was we didn't have someone that could take the top off the defense. I mean, LaFell had some nice long catches, but he's not, a guy that's just going to burn past people. And I don't know if after the injuries, and at the age, if Victor Cruz is still that guy. If he is, it doesn't hurt him, bring him in. I would be surprised if the Bengals get him, only because, from what I recall, this is a fairly weak wide receiver free agency year, and some of the top guys who are entering free agency, a lot of the speculation is they're going to be staying with their teams. So Victor Cruz may be one of the top options, which means he's probably going to get overpaid a little bit, and I would be surprised to see the Bengals overpay, because they're generally not a team that's active in that first week of free agency when all the craziness happens. They tend to hang out, wait a few weeks, wait until a lot of the top names are gone, and they can take someone who's not going to risk them losing a compensatory pick. If Cruz makes it that far, if he goes the first couple weeks and no one throws an offer at him because they see he is slowing, he's not the same player he was, at that point I could see the Bengals possibly bringing him in. But before then, I'd be very surprised if he's someone they look at in the first week or two of free agency.
Yeah, part of it of classic Bengals. Big name guy, is coming off a couple of disappointing seasons, but had somewhat recently some big seasons. They might be able to get him cheaper than some think, just depending on he's had some injuries. There's obviously with Odell Beckham and other guys that the Giants have brought in. Cruz has kind of fallen by the wayside, and that's why they cut him. My thing with it is Cruz is more where he had the bulk of his damage was out of the slot. And the Bengals, we talked about this earlier, Scott. The Bengals need to figure out if Boyd is their Victor Cruz going forward, if he is their slot guy, and even if he's a number 2 option or whatever you want to call that. But if he's their guy that's going to work inside, then I don't see a use for Victor Cruz unless the Bengals don't have any more long-term plans for guys like Cody Cord, James Wright towards the bottom of the receiver depth chart, and Cruz is kind of your number 4 guy. At this point, I don't think Victor Cruz would settle for a number 4 role. I think he's probably looking for a number 2 role, number 3 role at a minimum. But if I remember correctly, he's done the bulk of his damage out of the slot, and I just don't think that's the kind of guy the Bengals need in the receiver group. I think they need more of a bigger boundary guy, whether it's, again, Brandon LaFell, whether it's, a handful of Mike Williams in the draft, Corey Davis, or if it's still a guy who's relatively shorter but can stretch the field with his speed. I put up on Cincy Jungle a free agency spotlight of Marcus Wheaton, the Steelers receiver, who is probably going to not be with Pittsburgh next year because they have to pay Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, and they like Eli Rogers. So Wheaton's probably gone. And if you look at Spotrac, the website that tracks contracts and things of that nature in professional sports, they predict that Wheaton will be less in terms of average $1 million a year per year salary than LaFell. And that to me was pretty interesting, especially because Wheaton's about 4 years younger than LaFell. So, if they're going to go in outside free agency for a receiver, I prefer they look at LaFell, a guy like Marcus Wheaton. Kenny Stills is another guy that's out there that's a deep threat that could bring some real speed to this offense. I like Victor Cruz. I just don't see the fit. That's my thing with it. Any additional thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I think that kind of all the points you said are good ones. I think the one thing that would have to be considered too, and the one thing that we can't tell by sitting here, is what kind of locker room guy is he? Because it seems to be the impression you get from the Bengals is when they bring a veteran in, it's someone that can mesh with the younger players and kind of help mold the younger players, help kind of bring them in, show them the ins and outs. Is he one of these guys who's going to come in and say, yeah, I'm not the guy I used to be. I'm going to settle, be number 3, number 4 wide receiver. I'm going to show you the tricks of the trade to help make you better, Tyler Boyd. I'm going to help make you better, Cody Core. Or is he guys going to come in and say, no, I'm fighting those guys for a spot. I want to be that second guy. It's about me. It's I want more. And I think wasn't one of the reasons the Giants cut him because he wanted more money or wanted a substantial amount of money. I think the Giants were like, yeah, screw that. We have better guys who are younger, cheaper. You're gone. So I don't know what his mentality is. I'm guessing he's probably not the locker room guy that would have the mindset they would bring in. They tend to be fairly particular about those free agents, that they have to have that right kind of mindset that LaFell kind of had. He seemed to be a team first guy, a guy who had success, who seemed to be more interested in, I want to see the team do well. I want to help the team. I want to mesh with the team. I want to do things the team way, that help lead the team, help, get everyone to go in the same direction, be the locker room guy, the guy in the practices. If that's Victor Cruz, I've never heard Victor Cruz and those comments go together, but if that is him, I could see them pursuing him. Otherwise, I think it would be a surprise. Yeah,
and there's two sides to that. LaFell obviously is a very low-key guy, and one of the things they obviously like that about him, and they also like the fact that he won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, and the experience and leadership and all of that comes with being a championship player. Cruz has also won a Super Bowl with the Giants, but as we've seen in recent years, that Giants receiving core with Beckham and Cruz and others can be a little bit me first and not so much team first. And they also added Sterling Shepard last year for their team, and obviously they like him, they like Beckham, and that's how they're moving forward. So we'll see how that plays out. We're going to do one final question and get out of here, Scott. It was actually, we've kind of hit the trifecta. We've had Twitter questions, we've had questions from the YouTube chat, and now we've got one from Cincy Jungle. And it's from a commenter who calls himself Keithster. This is interesting, and I don't know how much insight you have on this, but he asks, how much, if any, did Andy Dalton's thumb impact his accuracy and or confidence in the beginning of this year? Any thoughts on that? Obviously you saw Dalton kind of get through some bumps in the road, whether it's, feeling out new receiving options, a new coach, offensive line issues. He still didn't create many turnovers. He was pretty low on that spectrum, but just wasn't as exciting in 2015. Do you think there's a physical and or mental aspect with the thumb injury that lingered, or was it just a perfect storm of a combination of all those other factors?
I'm still convinced. I think, at least to me, from my perspective, a lot of it just looked to be the new offense. Losing Hugh Jackson, bringing in and not so much losing Hugh as much as it was the guy who replaced him. He just did not, it was his first stint ever as an offensive coordinator, especially at the NFL level, and there were just a lot of times where the play calling just seemed to be very predictable. They weren't able to get guys open. They weren't able to give them the pass protection, and I just think it was a matter of the system. It seemed as the year went on, they seemed to get a little more comfortable as a unit. They seemed to be doing a little better job I know early on we were trying to say, well, it's not so much that, it's just Eifert's out. As soon as Eifert gets back, everything gets better. Eifert got back, things didn't get better, and I think we just saw that, the play calling wasn't there, the scheme wasn't there, and I think every week this season we had, on the podcast and the comments on Cincy Jungle and the articles, you had a very similar theme that was, hey, this offense just isn't, blocking isn't right, the guys aren't getting the ball, the play calling is horribly predictable. We don't seem to have any sort of, rhyme or reason what we're doing. Obviously, we're not making second half adjustments. To me, I think those were a lot bigger of an impact than the thumb. Now, I'm saying that as an outside observer who has never actually seen Andy Dalton's thumb. I think we've all seen his rubber, ring he wears on his hand. I don't think that affected anything. But as far as his thumb, it'd be hard for us to say.
If we're talking mental issues, or if there's a potential for him, being hesitant because of either getting hurt, or I didn't see a ton of fluttery passes or really errant throws. I mean, they were some here and there, but I didn't really see it. To me, if there was a mental thing that got to Andy Dalton last year, it was the play of the offensive line, and there were times where he scrambled in games where he experienced a lot of pressure, a lot of sacks. There were times where he actually had a clean pocket and ended up scrambling out of it and not letting a play develop. Now, it wasn't a plaguing issue, but there were times where plays could have been made had he hung in there after taking so many hits and sacks throughout the season. That's something I worry about far more than the thumb. Once a quarterback gets skittish, that's very hard to get him out of that kind of mindset. I don't foresee it being a long-term problem, especially if the Bengals shore things up, whether it's re-signing guys up front and or adding talent to the offensive line or doing things differently schematically to help with the pressure. But that, to me, was the thing that stuck out the most in terms of a mental hurdle for Andy Dalton last year. I think overall he took pretty good care of the football. He finished with his second highest passer rating in his career, 91.8, after finishing at a ridiculous 106.2 the year before. Only had 8 interceptions. He had 5 fumbles, but definitely wasn't forcing the ball elsewhere. A pretty noticeable dip in touchdowns. Only 18 passing touchdowns. Did have 4 rushing touchdowns, so they asked him to still do that. But I think it's not the thumb. I think it's protection, and I think Andy Dalton is a good NFL quarterback. He's not. I hate to use the word elite. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not a top 5. He's probably hovering around that top 10 area, and this is a topic of much debate. But he's a guy that if you give him protection and you give him weapons, you saw it in 2015, he can be close to that top 5 quarterback because he gains confidence with all of the guys around him. And who knows what would have happened with the Bengals had he not, injured his thumb in 2015, if they would have ended up beating the Steelers at home or whatever the case may be. There are just a few things that you need to do with Andy Dalton, one of which is, fix the line problems we saw last year, get him some more talent around him in terms of the skill positions. But it's on Andy Dalton as well to start winning these big games. And he has to play better in these Steelers games. He has to play better against the Ravens, even though the Bengals have a pretty good record against the Ravens lately. He has to play better against them, and he has to play well on primetime, whether it's against those teams or other teams. And I don't think any of this has to do with Keithster's question about a thumb or anything like that. I think it's scheme. I think it's jitters. I think it's playing better competition that all add up to that. But overall, I think that, the Bengals need to make a lot of improvements to, again, help out their quarterback this offseason, whether it's in the draft or free agency. Scott?
Well, and it's very true that, if you finish with a top 10 pick, which the Bengals have, there's obviously a reason you have that pick. Usually right. You don't have that pick because you're one guy away from the Super Bowl. There's I mean, obviously they are a year away from coming really close to that 12-4 season when they looked like a contender until Dalton got hurt. But you obviously have multiple holes that we've talked about today, and we're going to talk in the future. So, yeah, there's definitely things they need to do going forward. Getting the guys healthy, but also getting the scheme, getting the right plays, and making sure they have everything locked in, everything, all those holes filled, not just for this year, but for the upcoming years. We've kind of highlighted on some of those in some of the positions. There's just a lot of key positions. They are just really shallow right now. And granted, I know some of that changes as they hit free agency and they re-sign some of their own, but still, if you looked at the roster right now, there's there's definitely some spots they need to be making sure they're looking at.
Yeah, and you look, I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, especially when it was just one episode ago. I mean, you look at what the Atlanta Falcons did last offseason. I mean, Matt Ryan is probably looked at universally as a slightly better quarterback than Andy Dalton, especially in terms of raw talent. But there are a lot of career parallels there, and especially with Andy Dalton making 5 straight postseason berths, and that's not really Matt Ryan's resume. But if you look at the Atlanta Falcons this year, obviously they had the 2 talented running backs. They added Mohamed Sanu and Taylor Gabriel to their offense. They traded for Alex Mack, the center. They signed Tom Compton, a tackle for them to boost their line. And then they did some things on defense in free agency in the draft. So, their activity helped out a good to very good quarterback, but one that's not universally considered in the top 5 in the NFL, and that's what got them to the Super Bowl. So I think if the Bengals really focus on that, plugging some holes on defense, building some depth there, but really looking at the offensive line and the offensive skill positions and say, how can we help out our quarterback? How can we do that? And I think we'll see some good things for the Bengals in 2017 and hopefully a quick rebound from a poor season last year. Scott, this has been fun. The fan questions have been coming at a big pace. We normally don't answer this many, but there were a lot of good ones, and we wanted to make sure that we got them on all of the 3 mediums that we broadcast on, so we wanted to get to them. So appreciate your time. I know we went a little long, and appreciate your insight on these questions.
And I think and the interesting thing is a lot of the questions are on the same thing, which is the draft. And I think that's something that the Bengals, they just have to make, with as many picks as they have this year and having high picks, they just have to make sure they get it right. Because it's been, since 2010, 2011 that they've really done a great job in the draft. And you look at, a lot of these guys that have been taken higher in the draft, like Paul Dawson, Will Clark, Mohamed Sanu, Dante Moak, Brandon Gee, Jake Fisher, Margus Hunt, Devin Still, Obuehi, Denard. There's just a lot of guys they've been taken higher that just really haven't panned out. And they just, at some point, they just have to get back to those drafts where they just nailed them. I think 2010, 2011, they did that. They've been living off that for a while. And that window's closing. And, hey, you've got some high picks. Not they're going to hit every pick, but, yeah, it's definitely a year to at least get some of them.
Yep, got to do that, and you got to spend the money wisely in free agency and spend it in general. They've sat on it the last couple of seasons, and it really has not done them any favors. And this, I think, it culminated last year, and I think they really need to make some wise moves and spend some money in free agency, and both internally and externally, as well as, like you said, Scott, hit on a number of picks this year. That's going to be huge for them in 2017.